Hey hockey card fans, welcome back to the channel. Today I went to the London Collectibles Expo they have at Centennial Hall. Didn't really find much in hockey cards. I'm not looking to spend like hundreds of dollars, and there was a vendor who had a lot of good cards, but even though they were 50% off, they were still too much money, and there was no way in hell I could afford it. But I did find one guy whose cards were, he had a bunch of cards, nothing put in order, and I managed to come across things. So I paid $5 for 3 cards, so I spent $15 on these cards. They come from 3 different sets. So we'll start with the 1972 O-PEE-CHEE set, 72-73. This is when Boston won their second Stanley Cup in 1972. And then they went on to play the Summit Series. So this is an action card with Rangers defenseman Brad Park. And he checks opposing forward. Brad Park played for the Rangers. They're playing the Sabres in this game. And he was one of the top defensemen in the NHL at the time. Later on, he would actually be traded to Boston for Carol Vodney. Card's in okay shape. It's got a bit of a ding in there with a crease. But other than that, these are not in bad shape. I never liked... This set's not my favorite set. And then we're going to move up to the 1977 O-PEE-CHEE set. So this is 76-77 stat year. This is when Montreal won their second straight Stanley Cup. And we're going with Buffalo Sabres goalie Gerry Desjardins. This card's in pretty good shape. Like the cut along the one edge is not good. In 49 games last year, he had a 2.63 goals against average and 3 shutouts. He'd played for the Kings, the Blackhawks, the Islanders, and the Sabres. He'd also spent some time in the WHA with the Michigan Stags Baltimore Blades. This would be his last O-PEE-CHEE card, as the Buffalo Sabres went with youth and went with Donnie Edwards and Bob Sauvé. They had 2 young goalies in their system. Dave Dryden had already left. And Desjardins, who was one of their main goalies in the playoffs when they went to that Stanley Cup run, was then gone played like 3 games in 77-78 and was gone. And then we have goalie for the Minnesota North Stars, who got traded to the Capitals, Gary Suitcase Smith. There's a story where he was hurt. He got hurt playing. He went down for conditioning that year with the promise that he'd be back up once he was okay. So he took them at their word, and when he went back up to Minnesota, when he was done condition, they asked him, "What the hell are you doing here? Get the hell out of here." So I think that's what necessitated the trade. But I like these old trade cards. I loved his helmet, his mask. He had a cool mask. Gary Smith, of course, started his career with Toronto. Went to the Oakland Seals, Chicago Blackhawks, Vancouver Canucks, Minnesota North Stars. He played like 1 season, 36 games with them. 10-17-8 record with a 4 goals against average and 1 shutout. Then they traded to the Caps the very next year. And then in 77-78 he plays 3 games with Minnesota and then goes on to the Washington Capitals. Plays 2 years in the WHA, wins a Avco with the Winnipeg Jets. Him and Joe Daly split duties there. And then he goes back to the NHL with the Jets, plays 20 games. He was 173, 256, and 74 ties with a 3.4 goals against average and 26 shutouts. Played for some truly bad teams. What did he get traded for that year? So in September 4th, 1977, he signed by the Washington Caps. And then on February 20th, 1978, he's claimed off waivers by Minnesota from Washington Capitals. So he goes from Minnesota to Washington, back to Minnesota. In 17 games with Washington, he was 2-12-3 with a 4.17 goals against average. Goes back to Minnesota and is 0-2-1 with a 3.03. So he did a little better. So that's interesting. He went back to the same team. Capitals were a brutal team back then. Alright, so that's the 3 cards we have for that. I paid $5 for these 3 cards. Now let's go to the other set. I have 12 cards from the 1970 O-PEE-CHEE set. So this is a 69-70 stat year. This is the Boston Bruins' first Stanley Cup. And we have quite a few guys here. First off, we have defensemen for the Vancouver Canucks. Paul Peel. This is the movie star set because they have the little light things in the back. I have many Paul Peel cards. He played in the WHA. Spent many years there. Paul Peel played in the WHA All-Star Game in 74, 75, and 77. Got to start with the Detroit Red Wings. Played 2 seasons with the Vancouver Canucks before moving to the Houston Aeros, where he spent his entire WHA career before moving to and went back for 10 games in the NHL. Won 2 AFCO trophies as well. We're going to stay with the Vancouver Canucks. We're going to go with defenseman Dale Talon. He was a first round, second overall pick by the Vancouver Canucks in 1970 draft. The Buffalo Sabres had the first draft pick that year, and they picked Gilbert Perron. So Vancouver went with defenseman. He only played 3 years in Vancouver before going to Chicago, then spent a couple of years in Pittsburgh. Doesn't say why he was traded. But he was also part of the Summit Series, though I don't think he played very much. Started right away for the Canucks. He was a pretty good defenseman. And we're going with Len Lund. This picture's a little more photoshopped. Looks almost cartoonish compared to the others. The card's not in bad shape. None of these cards are in bad shape. I would call them good, but they're not fantastic. Len Lund, I actually have his card when he played for the Edmonton Oilers in the WHA, his last card. But he played for the Detroit Red Wings for 4 seasons. 2 seasons with Chicago Blackhawks, 7 games with Minnesota North Stars, and then 20 games with Vancouver. So he was part of the expansion draft. Sticking with Vancouver again, we're going with defenseman Mark Roumet. Don't know much about him. This card's a little more cut at the top. The cut's not very good. And there is a crease right there. Again, I only paid $5 for 3 cards. He actually played for the Toronto Maple Leafs in the late 50s. Detroit Red Wings for 2 years from 59 to 61. 3 games with Montreal in 63-64. Won AHL title with the Rochester Amherst. 2 Western Hockey League titles with the Vancouver Canucks. This is before they went to the NHL. And when Vancouver joined the NHL, half the WHL team, their Western Hockey League team, basically came over. A lot of them did. And that's where he played 27 games. And the last Vancouver card we have is left winger Wayne Mackey, the brother of Chico Mackey, who played for Chicago. He had started his career with Chicago Blackhawks, then went to the St. Louis Blues, and then finally spent his last 3 years in the league with the Vancouver Canucks. He was part of the expansion draft. So there we go, 5 Vancouver Canucks, when I used to have only 1 or 2. Still sticking with the same set, we're going to the Pittsburgh Penguins. And we have center Brian Hextall. Again, this card, bad cut job. Little rough down here. Nothing special there. I have several of his cards, so I'm not going to talk about them. This guy. And then we have defenseman for the Pittsburgh Penguins, Dwayne Rupp. He was an assistant that year. I don't like how they have the stats at the back. Like, he's played 3 years in the NHL with 4 teams: New York, Toronto, Minnesota, Pittsburgh. 8 goals, 34 assists for 92 penalty minutes. And then in 69-70, he plays for Pittsburgh. 2 goals, 14 assists, 18 penalty minutes. I don't like how they have the stats. It's not as good as, like, say, that year where you can see all the stats in the NHL. So I never liked how they did that. I do have some of his other cards. Rupp had played for the Toronto Maple Leafs, the New York Rangers, the Toronto Maple Leafs, and then Pittsburgh, Minnesota, back to Pittsburgh, and then in the WHA. Now we're going with the LA Kings defenseman, Dave Amadio. I don't know much about him. This card has a little bit of a crease on the corner. I wish these were in better shape. They're not. He started his career with the Detroit Red Wings. And then he only played 2 games with the Red Wings. Then he went minors. Won an AHL title with Springfield Indians back in '62. But spent all of his career in the minors. And then finally, from '67 to '69, he played 113 games with the LA Kings. So not really a household name. 125 NHL games, 5 goals, 11 assists for 16 points. Played 16 playoff games, had 1 goal, 2 assists. November 5th, 1961, traded from Detroit Red Wings to New York Rangers for Don Cherry. And then September of '67, he was signed by the LA Kings. So him and Don Cherry have a little bit of a history there. This is his second NHL card. He does get a rookie card in '69. And we have another defenseman by the LA Kings. We have Noel Price. I have several of his cards when he played for the Atlanta Flames. So no big surprises there. Been around a long time. He had played for 5 other teams: Toronto, New York, Detroit, Montreal, and Pittsburgh. And then in 1969-70, he wasn't even in the NHL. He was in the minors. So he's bounced around the league. Now we're going to go with the Detroit Red Wings. Right winger Wayne Connolly. I actually have his WHA card. This card would be in better shape except for the tape mark on the front. Can't do anything about that. Wayne Connolly started his career with the Montreal Canadiens and then went to the Boston Bruins, Minnesota North Stars, Detroit Red Wings, St. Louis Blues, Vancouver Canucks, and then spent 5 years in the WHA with the Minnesota Fighting Saints, Cleveland Crusaders, Calgary Cowboys, and Edmonton Oilers. So I actually have his WHA cards, several of them. Trade from Montreal to Canadiens to Boston Bruins in '61 for Bob Armstrong and loan of Dallas Smith. Expansion draft in '67 by Minnesota. Traded from Detroit Red Wings with Gary Younger to St. Louis Blues for Red Berenson and Tim Eggleston. Say St. Louis won that deal. And then November 15th, '71, traded from St. Louis with Jim Lorentz and Gene Carr to New York Rangers for Jack Edgers, Andre Dupont, Mike Murphy, and player to be named later. I'm going to give the edge to nobody because all these guys were later traded somewhere else. And then a day later, he's traded from New York Rangers with Bob Stewart and Dave Ballant in Vancouver for Jim Wist and Gary Doak. So Vancouver wins that deal. And we're going with the St. Louis Blues down to the Mississippi for defenseman Noel Picard. Other than the soft corner at the top, this card's actually in really good shape. It's probably the best shaped card I have here from this little lot. Noel Picard won a Stanley Cup with the Montreal Canadiens in '65. Went to the expansion draft with St. Louis Blues. Went to 3 Stanley Cup finals with them. And then ended his career with the Atlanta Flames as part of the expansion draft there. So played for the Blues. Claimed an expansion draft by St. Louis from Montreal, yep. And then claimed off waivers by Atlanta from St. Louis. Then we have our second rookie card. This is St. Louis Blues center Jim Lorentz. It's in badly cut card on this 3 sides with a slight corner damage. Not a very good card. Jim Lorentz had actually played for Boston in 1969-70 where he won the Stanley Cup. Got traded to St. Louis, then went to the Rangers, then I know him best as in the Buffalo Sabres. Went to another Stanley Cup final with them. Traded from Boston Bruins to St. Louis for round 1 pick in 1970, which turned out to be Ron Plum. St. Louis won this deal big time. November 15th, traded from St. Louis with Wayne Connolly and Gene Carr. We already have Wayne Connolly. For Jack Edgers, Andre Dupont, Mike Murphy, and player to be named later. So he gets traded from Boston to St. Louis, and then within a year, then in 1972, he's traded from New York Rangers to Buffalo for a player to be named later, so we don't know who he's traded for. So I'm going to have to give the nod to the St. Louis Blues from that trade, simply because they got Andre Dupont and Mike Murphy. Anyway, there we have it. We have 12 cards from the 1970 O-PEE-CHEE set, the movie star set. They're not in the best shape, but for the price I paid, I can't be a beggar. And then, of course, I got the two goalies from the 78 set or 77 set, and then the one from the 72 set. So not a bad haul there. All you hockey card fans out there, let me know what you guys think of Gary Smith's mask. Isn't that a cool mask? And if you know of any other stories involving Gary the Suitcase Smith, leave comments in the comment section. Until next time, this has been Hockey Night in Belmont.